Good evening and welcome to the rest of the news. We have a tremendous program lined up for you. Our special guest is an attorney, Mr. Robert Muise from the American Freedom Law Center. We appreciate you being with us today. And our other guest here is Ed Holloway, who is a former state representative. And we certainly appreciate you being here to help us with this. Now, Mr. Muise, can you explain to us about these cases in 2009, 2010, and 2012? Were they all in Dearborn, Michigan?
Right. Well, we had those three cases that arose out of Dearborn, Michigan, associated with the Arab Festival, which they've been holding in that city for I think it was over 17 years. And it's one of the largest Arab festivals, literally in the world, and certainly in the United States. And so it's a place that often attracts a lot of Christian missionaries because there's a lot of Muslims there, and the Christian missionaries come to evangelize. And in 2009, we represented a Christian pastor, George Saig, who had been going to the festival for probably about 5 or 6 years with a group of Christian evangelists who just simply wanted to hand out Christian pamphlets and literature on the public sidewalks during the Arab Festival. And the city of Dearborn, in conjunction with the organizer of the Arab Festival, passed this restriction on handing out literature on the public sidewalks. And so we challenged that under the First Amendment, and we won. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit ruled in our favor and struck down that speech restriction as violating the Constitution. In 2010, I represented 4 Christian missionaries who, again, went back to the Arab Festival and were preaching to a group of Muslims there, and they were arrested by the city police for disorderly conduct. Thankfully, they had all the actions that they were engaged in captured on video. I represented them in a criminal trial, a week-long criminal trial in the city of Dearborn, and they were acquitted of all their charges, and we turned around and sued the city under the Civil Rights Statute for violating their constitutional rights, and the city ended up paying $300,000 in damages and issuing a public apology. Well, in 2012, it happened again. We represented a group of Christian missionaries who went to the Arab Festival wearing T-shirts and carrying signs, and they were literally attacked by a violent mob of Muslims. And the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, who were providing the law enforcement at the festival that year, gave the Bible believers, the Christian groups, an option. They could either leave the festival or they would be arrested for disorderly conduct. Under the First Amendment, that's known as a heckler's veto. And the government doesn't have a right to enforce a heckler's veto by allowing violence to be a response to free speech. So we sued the Wayne County Sheriff's Department. In this case, it has such important ramifications for the First Amendment that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit in Cincinnati, Ohio, granted en banc review, which means full court review. And I argued this case on March 4th of this year before a 15-judge panel of federal judges, 15-judge federal judge panel in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so we're waiting for a ruling in that case.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. Can we go ahead and show about 2 minutes of the video of this incident that occurred in 2012 in Dearborn, Michigan?
Go! Do you understand English?
We just showed that, and it's, people may not believe that this really happened, and they think we're talking through our heads because, people aren't used to having people throw bottles at them and eggs and all of that. But, I wanted to ask you one quick question. We hear stories about things happening in Europe and France and England and Germany and everywhere where they have what they call no-go zones, where they've essentially set up their own laws within a certain district, and the American laws and the American Constitution seems to go out the window, and we have in these no-go zones, it seems, so you correct me if I'm wrong, but they have polygamy And if a girl goes out with a Christian, they could be what they call honor killing, and all of these terrible things that are beginning to happen in these areas where the Muslims have dominance. Now, can you tell me where I went wrong on all that?
I don't know all the facts of the so-called no-go zones, but there's certainly what you're really referring to is the imposition of what is known as Sharia law.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that's, you have some of these Sharia law courts that are cropping up over in England.
Yeah.
And, I tell people, when people say, well, do you have any evidence that, Sharia law is being enforced here in the United States? Well, and I point to these Dearborn cases because it's interesting because the city of Dearborn has the largest concentration of Muslims. So they have political clout there. And in fact, we've even had one of the judges in that first case I was mentioning with George Saig made the point that under Sharia law, because one of the reasons why they didn't want the Christians to be handing out literature at the Arab Festival, because the punishment under Sharia law for converting to Christianity is capital punishment. And so they, the judge made the point that these Christians have to evangelize on the sidewalks and not be at booths because those who will approach them will be considered apostates. And so they need to have the leeway to be able to evangelize outside of areas that may not be recognized. And even in that Bible Believers case, we had one judge refer to the fact that you have, in effect, the Wayne County Sheriff's Department enforcing blasphemy laws are part and parcel of Sharia. You don't have the freedom of speech. You don't have free exercise of religion under Sharia law. In that way, in many respects, we talk about our Judeo-Christian heritage, which is very true. Our Constitution was founded upon Judeo-Christian values.
Yes.
Sharia law, conversely, is antithetical to our fundamental values. There is no right to free speech. There is no right to the free exercise of religion under Sharia law. So it's antithetical to what's going on. And so we may not have directly a statute passed that's under Sharia law, but you see indirectly these rights of Christians being suppressed in the hands of police officers operating under the bidding of the Muslims in the city of Dearborn. And so that's a dangerous precedent. But like I said, thankfully we've won those other two cases, and I fully expect to win this third case as well.
Robert, is a two-way street because with the Muslims there that are moderate, I call, are confronted by the others, and if any one of them would convert to Christianity, again, it's an automatic death sentence. And those are the kind of things that are growing as their population increases and their numbers increase in a community. They then take on that aspect of the political clout and all the rest of it to force this thing with Sharia law.
Yeah.
Well, we're seeing over in Iraq and with ISIS in particular. I mean, those are Sharia adherent organizations. The President of the United States went on to say that, well, they're not Muslims, and how the president knows which organization is or is not a particular religious organization. But one of the points that he used to make his point was that they kill so many other Muslims. Well, the reason for that is under Sharia law, those other Muslims who do not adhere to those strict dictates are considered apostates, and the punishment for apostasy is death. So it's not surprising that you see these Sharia-adherent Muslim organizations like ISIS killing Christians and killing other Muslims as well. Because for Christians and Jews, you really have three choices. You can submit to Islam, you can convert to Islam, or death. It's one of those threes. For Muslims apostates, the punishment is capital punishment. So it's not a surprise that we're seeing that. And Sharia is one of the dangers that's out there. I mean, in fact, that's how you identify really who the dangerous organizations are, is the fact that those that are not adherent to Sharia. And I'll add, my colleague David Yerushalmi, who's an Orthodox Jew, he was a co-founder of mine of the American Freedom Law Center. He and a professor from Israel published this report in Perspectives on Terrorism. Now, Perspectives on Terrorism is an international journal on terrorism. This is a peer-reviewed publication. It's not just some blog. And they did this field study, and they showed that over 80% of the U.S. mosques, the mosques here in the United States, promote Sharia and promote violence against the West. There's a direct connection to those mosques that are most adherent to Sharia and those that promote violence against the West. And 80% of the mosques, a statistically significant number of mosques that they did the field study endorse violence against the West right here in the United States of America. So this isn't just some phantom danger. This is real.
And this is the problem with our media, who has not been reporting this. It's like it's something new with these so-called terrorists of a modern nature. But the concept is hundreds of thousands of years old, and it's been going on forever, and it's nothing new about it, and they've used that constantly as they increase their population in this country and the number of immigrants that are being brought here. There's no screening is taking place of which ones are moderate and which ones are terrorists and others, and it's becoming an increasing thing. And this has been their goal from the very outset, and that was the process that they went through to take over most of Europe before the Crusades. We have a situation in Jefferson County, which again, we're 100 miles from Cincinnati.
Right, that's where we are, Jefferson County.
We're the circuit court there where the Sixth Circuit is located. And we're fighting this kind of thing because the numbers here, 15% of our population now are immigrants. We brought in people from Somalia. We've now just recently started with Syria. We're bringing in refugees from Syria. We're in the process of, the Arabs here are formulating a newspaper, an Arab-only newspaper, and all those communications. So we're looking at what could be another Dearborn, Michigan down the road. And they're very patient. They have a process of patience that's unbelievable. I've been in the Middle East. I've been with Arab groups and Muslim groups and finding out what was going on and how they thought. And they talk about things like the Crusade, like it happened last year. And they're making revenge. They've been humiliated. They were humiliated when they failed to take Venice. And they've been humiliated. Now it's time for revenge. And they're working at it very diligently and time again. They keep at it, and they're methodical about it.
But in Europe, essentially, you had an invasion of Europe, and it occurred without firing a shot. Right? It happened because number one, the Christian communities have been letting ourselves down as well. We're not having kids anymore, right? But the Muslims are having children. They're coming in through the immigration policies, to the point where, you have even leaders in France talking about that our culture is gone, right? France, which is one of the most, Christian nations in Europe, right, is now becoming very much a Muslim nation because of the immigration. You pointed to something, the Muslim Brotherhood. There was an explanatory memorandum that was introduced in the largest terrorism financing trial ever conducted here in the United States, the Holy Land Foundation trial, that resulted in convictions. And the government presented evidence. The Muslim Brotherhood has this explanatory memorandum. This is their own words, where they talk about their goal for North America, and they describe it as a civilization jihad. And so that's, it's both violence and nonviolence. Obviously we're seeing the violence with Boston Marathon, with Fort Hood
right,
shooting, with 9/11, but you're seeing the nonviolent through immigration, through establishing, these communities that don't want to assimilate and don't want to become Americans. They want to be separate, and they want to stay separate, and they want to gain power and political power and political club. And that's a problem. That's why I pointed out the fact that we're a Judeo-Christian nation, and the problem with Islam, Sharia here in Islam in particular, is that it will not, because it cannot assimilate. Democracy is contrary to Sharia law. You can't have a democracy because all laws come from Allah. You can't have man-made laws. They're just incompatible. It's oil and water, and that's a serious problem.
And this is where Americans have been misled in the sense that they're thinking about all these other former immigrants from Italy and Germany and others that assimilated and became Americans, and everything has been wonderful. And you're exactly right on what their principles are and the fact that they will not and cannot, under their law, assimilate with anything. So this is a major problem. We have to communicate to the American public, and particularly to the voters, and make sure they understand what's necessary in order to restore America.
The work you're doing is so important. Do you have a website that people could get more information or make donations to your organization?
They go to our website. It's AmericanFreedomLawCenter.org. We're a non-profit public interest law firm, so all the legal work we do is pro bono for the good. It's free, and we rely on tax-deductible donations. We're a 501c3. But if you're viewers and listeners go to our website and see all the different cases we have all across the country. I think they'll be pretty surprised about the type of work we're doing and the type of battles we're fighting. But these are important. You know, our slogan is fighting for faith and freedom, and that's exactly what we do. And you know, I was in the Marine Corps for 13 years as an officer before I went and got my law degree from Notre Dame. 20 years ago. And I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I hung up my boots and got my law degree because, for good or ill, these battles, and we have many domestic enemies, these battles are happening in the courtrooms. That's where our culture is being changed, and that's where the fight is, and that's what I do.
Well, I think it's very important because
Yeah.
I know in several cases that I've run into where lawsuits have been filed, and the cost of pursuing those, and even if you lose or win, they will appeal, and you keep it going, you keep going until you run out of money, and then they're happy.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it just seems to me that they are doing away with American laws and the American Constitution and building their little, I would call it no-go zone, where they're going to have Sharia law, even though, you know, polygamy is not legal and killing your daughter for an honor killing is not legal, but they're going to do it anyway. Is that right?
Well, you know, they're not going to do it on my watch, I guess is the way I'd put it. That's why, you know, we talk about these cases in Dearborn, and they're outrageous cases, but we're winning. You know, and the courts are ruling in our favor. So, but we have to keep fighting, right? Ronald Reagan made this, point famously, many years ago, that our freedoms were not handed down to us through the bloodstream. Right? We just can't expect to wake up tomorrow and have these constitutional freedoms. They must be fought for and protected unless they're one generation away from becoming extinct. And that's very true. So unless we have people who are standing up and willing to stand up and fight, and you know, we certainly will carry the fight for them in the courtrooms, or people like you covering this on your shows, that we awaken the American people and have them understand that, look, don't just presume that your freedoms are going to be there tomorrow, because that's not always the case.
Right.
And particularly with this government, we have a secular progressive government that wants to grow government, and the more government grows, the less we have freedoms. But we have to continue to fight these battles, and I vowed to do so, and I know there are many other, you know, patriotic Americans that feel the same way. And you know, in our soul, I mean, we know what is right as Americans, and we always rise to the occasion. So I'm always hopeful that I always have hope that Americans will continue to rise to the occasion and do what is right. And I like I said, I have a lot of faith and a lot of hope in the American people.
Well, give us that website again.
It's AmericanFreedomLawCenter.org.
Now, you know, this is shocking what we see happening in Dearborn, Michigan. And the question that comes to my mind, is this the only place this kind of thing is happening? Or is there a movement in other areas to try to basically do away with our laws and our First Amendment rights and things like that?
Well, one of the things is there's an organization called the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, which is a Muslim Brotherhood front group. They're an unindicted co-conspirator in that Holy Land Foundation trial that I had mentioned previously. And they're going around the country and they're trying to, like, for example, they will use our laws, which is what the Muslim Brotherhood said they would do. There's a law called the Religious Land Use Institutionalized Persons Act, or RILUPA. They'll go into communities and they'll want to build a mosque. And when the zoning board denies it, they'll turn around and sue them under this federal statute, claiming it's religious discrimination. And they're doing that in places all around the country. The Muslim student associations that are in so many of our universities across the country are Muslim Brotherhood front organizations.
Right.
So these things are happening. Dearborn is somewhat unique because they have a center of gravity there because of the population and the political power that they have. And that's really the history of Islam, because Muhammad, all the parts of Islam when they were cooperating with their neighbors was when they didn't have the physical strength and power. And then as soon as they did, they pulled out the sword and they started acting more aggressively and more violently against their neighbors. So it's playing itself out in Dearborn because that's where there's sort of a center of gravity. I don't know of any other community that has that large of a population and influence, but we certainly see through the universities that this is happening and in other communities, and this notion of political correctness, really, that's the mainstream media, our government as well, they won't even call the Fort Hood shooting
Right.
a terrorist act. It's workplace violence. I mean, we have this sort of nonsense that we have to battle as well. and the people who are supporting that part of it aren't doing so necessarily maliciously, but they're still supporting it because of their ignorance and because of political correctness. So we have to fight through those battles as well.
Robert, let me give you, you made a very good point that when you brought up CARE, that was the thing. We just recently found out that the leader of CARE in Kentucky is a professor at the University of Kentucky. He's a member of the CARE's National Board, and then he's a council member of the Islamic Society of North America. And his recent recordings said that ultimately, and this is a direct quote, ultimately, we Muslims can never be full citizens of this country because there is no way we can fully commit to the institutions and ideology of America. And it pretty well says it all about what's going on with CARE and the rest of the organizations. And they have the largest organization of this Muslim students in every campus, 150 campuses, and it's increasing, and they're working diligently 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right, and your quote is an important one for people to remember because it's the point that I've been trying to make, that Islam can't assimilate into our Judeo-Christian values because it just can't. I mean, the two are incompatible because there's a lack of free speech, lack of free exercise of religion, lack of a notion of democracy, lack of a notion of due process, lack of a notion of equal protection, particularly for women and others. That's why it's surprising to me that these, so many liberals are running to the defense of Islam when Islam is contrary to much of what the liberal agenda is trying to promote and push upon. So that's they make for interesting bedfellows, so to speak. But, that is a very key point that we have to understand, that there's going to be this conflict. And right now, it's sort of latent and it's sitting below the surface because there isn't as much of the sort of the center of gravity and the strength. But as that continues to grow, we're going to see these conflicts surfacing, I think, more commonly, like we've been seeing in Dearborn.
Well, do you think there's even though Dearborn seems to be much worse than anywhere else as far as Muslim control and Sharia law, would you say there's a potential for Muslim Sharia law to grow in other areas if they get the population of Muslims that they would need?
Well, I think the Sharia is antithetical to our Constitution. So as long as we have judges that can enforce the Constitution, we'll be okay. But the fact is that there may end up being conflicts that are going to arise where we're going to have to you have police doing things like they were doing in the city of Dearborn. So it may not be so a legislature per se passing something that's compliant with Sharia law, but more indirectly where you have things like the police enforcing restrictions, whether there are laws already on the books for trespass or laws on the books for disorderly conduct or these other things that we're seeing that are being used to suppress speech that might be critical or contrary to Islam, and in fact enforcing blasphemy laws like we've seen in our cases. So I'm not sure you'll see it directly. At that point, I think we're going to be at anarchy because then our Constitution has definitely been thrown out the door, and we'll be starting the second U.S. revolution, I think, at that point.
Well, when you mentioned Paris as an example, looking at what happened in France, it was a long, drawn-out process going on for several decades, and in the process, they now have over 6 million Muslims. The population of the regular French people is declining from age and fewer children. The number of the 6 million Muslims that are there now are increasing in population with multiple births. And at the same time, they have in Paris that large area where every member of the French government is afraid to go and will not, and they're operating right there under Sharia law, and they're not assimilating at all. And that's happening in other parts of Europe, and it's ultimately going to happen here if we don't recognize the problem.
And certainly we're going to run into problems of the Boston Marathon types, the Fort Worth massacre types, the 9/11 types, and all these other, the countless other terrorist attacks that we're just not even aware of because they were interdicted by the FBI or someone else along the way. So we do have to be cautious that we are at war. I guess is we're at the end of the day, we're at war. We've had attacks on our homeland, maybe not so much as some of the others, but it's definitely a threat that's out there that we have to be aware of.
It's our responsibility as Christians to confront this for reality of what it really is and do something.
You're doing tremendous work, and you're not you're doing it free to the people in need, but it's important for Americans to realize that what you're doing is essential and very important so that we can keep our laws that we are used to having in our constitutional.
How's everybody doing? It is good to be in Dearborn. It is good to be back in the Motor City. I see a lot of folks here who worked tirelessly on my 2008 campaign. Let's face it, you did not do it because you thought this was going to be a cakewalk. When you decide to support a candidate named Barack Hussein Obama.
Ruben, there's been several cops that have already gone by. I think their philosophy this year is just let us be fed to the wall. I think they're going to turn a blind eye to us completely, for good and for bad.
I think that this is a real threat, and what was it, something like 73,000 new refugees were coming in from Syria over the next few years. And, you know, we're having quite a few come to our city here in Louisville, Kentucky. And, you know, if something doesn't happen, I think we could end up being like Dearborn.
We've built a huge mosque has been built here in Louisville. It was funded by the Saudis. It is staffed by Wahhabis. And it is the beginning, and then close to here is an area called Fort Knox, with a military base, and there's a large mosque being built there. These are things that didn't exist in Kentucky until just recently. And it's again a growing thing that's going on across the country. Mosques are being built on a daily basis in all parts of the country. And in some of these universities and others that are teaching young people, is a compounding problem that everybody needs to be aware of.
Immigration issue is a national security issue. Elections have consequences. Within a short 8 years, we went from being the world power to now. You see what happens when the United States is becoming weak internationally. The world erupts.
Well, now this trial that you're working on, the 2012, is that a criminal trial or is it civil?
It's a civil. We filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Wayne County Sheriff's Department.
And so when do you think you might get a decision from the Sixth Circuit?
It's a 15-judge panel, so they'll all have to weigh in, and if there's a dissenting opinion or concurring opinions or who knows, hopefully they'll all agree with me and we'll get a 15 unanimous and it'll be one opinion written and it'll come out in the next 6 months, but it could take some time, as you can imagine.
Do you have to get all 15 judges to agree?
No, you just have to have a majority.
We appreciate Robert Muise and the American Freedom Law Center and Ed Holloway. And tune in again next week for the rest of the news.